First, what are we going to talk about today? Why should you be using Facebook to recruit? How can you prepare to do that? Then once you have done all the preparation, how should you set up your campaign? And then finally, and very important, how do you measure results? And maybe to clarify, what are we not going to talk about? It's about free or organic posting on social media. Why not? With that I mean, for instance, you have 100,000 followers on your wall, and you're going to publish something on your Facebook page. Only 3% of your followers will actually see that. So it's not a very effective way to recruit, right? Hence, in the past years, we've moved our model completely to advertising because that's the best way to recruit people. And also, very importantly, you should use the actual back office or the Facebook Business Manager of Facebook instead of boosting one of your posts. So we're not going to be talking about that today. We're also not going to be talking about detailed data-driven recruitment and analysis. That's a different webinar, and we'll send you the links to that also. So we're just going to be very top line. We're not going to go too deep in the data analysis session today. And we're also not going to talk about how do you kind of develop great working ads. Again, it's a different webinar, and we'll share the link on that later on. Good. Just one slide, a bit of 2 slides, just a bit of background on what we do. We actually focus on simple and providing qualified candidates to our customers, focusing on passive candidates through, as you could have guessed, targeted advertising on social media in a very user-friendly process. And at the end of the session, I'll quickly show you the software that we developed. For doing that, we've been, for now, 80% of our business coming out of Belgium. We are very, very much focused on analysis of all the data for a whole bunch of corporate customers, but also small and medium enterprises that you can see here. So we have a nice mix of big companies, small companies, which have their different challenges when recruiting, but we'll link back to that a bit later on also. Good. Let's start with why should you recruit on Facebook? And maybe a bit of a disclaimer. When we will be talking about Facebook today or in this session, we talk about all the Facebook platforms. So it includes obviously Facebook, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and also the Facebook Audience Network, which is a network of affiliated sites to Facebook, which you can use to advertise. But, instead of always saying Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and the Audience Network, as of now, I will say Facebook and use Facebook as the reference. But everything we explain is valid for all those platforms. Now, why should you recruit on Facebook? There's one big reason that you saw it already before. It's one of the few opportunities you will have to reach passive job seekers. Right? People actively looking for a job, you can find them on Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn, Stepstone, because those people are actually looking for a job, and they will by themselves go to those websites to search for jobs. But there's a very interesting bunch of candidates who are not actively looking, but once they would see an interesting job, they might say, well, you know what, why not? It's 1 hour less travel each day, better work-life balance, or it's a nice company, I've heard already good things about them, let's check it out. And that's where Facebook comes in, and it gives you a massive opportunity to reach those users. Just maybe to give you an example, an average user on Facebook, and again, I'm talking all different platforms here, but an average user on Facebook will scroll through 160 meters per day on their smartphone. That's a lot of opportunities. That's a lot of daily usage time, which you can actually use to get your ad in there and make sure it's seen. That's one reason. The second reason is also that actually, funnily enough, recruiters will focus more on LinkedIn when they are recruiting. And obviously, LinkedIn is a great medium to find candidates and do outbound recruiting. I will not deny that. But actually, again, amongst other reasons, because of passive candidates, the channels from Facebook are more used than the channels from LinkedIn. So that's a nice kind of assessment there. But again, if you're following this webinar, I'm pretty sure you've done it because you know there's an interest in publishing in Facebook. So before we go on to the basics, I'll quickly have a look at some of the questions. Okay, how to scale up to Instagram? We'll come back to that later. So we'll come back to those two questions later in the presentation. Good, let's have a look. So marketing recruitment basics, so just making sure we all agree on the terms. We'll talk all about the funnel today. And if you're in recruitment, you're probably already aware that there's a recruitment funnel. People will apply for a vacancy. Then you have an internal selection process, which is different for every company. And eventually you hire. And obviously you have more people that apply. You won't hire everybody. So every time, every step, there's a couple of people who drop out, either because you stop the process for them, or themselves they decide to stop with the process. But what's important is to kind of keep this thinking, when you start looking for sourcing your candidates, because the same applies in your funnel. You have people who are discovering your company before they engage. So there's a discovery range where you can actually interact with people. Then they will engage with you as a company, with you as a brand. And then finally, they might be attracted by a specific vacancy. So these three steps of discover, engage, attract are very important to keep in mind when you set up your campaigns and start targeting candidates. Sorry, I needed a bit of water there. Maybe to visualize it a bit more, and I hope you'll allow me to use some Dutch-based advertising. In the discover phase, for instance, what we sometimes do is to kind of start targeting a broad audience, is do and push general content which is not yet related to either a company or a vacancy. That's very important, right? So for instance, you could do a little quiz, right? Or you can push some specific content towards an audience where you think is, let's say you're looking for construction workers, you might publish a little quiz about safety in building, right? So you could use a content piece like that. Once you build data from that, you can then use that data to start looking at, might any of these candidates be interested in actually thinking about their career? So again, you do a general post about, how to write your resume, how to boost your career. Are you on the right career track? Ideally linked to the construction industry, how to build a career in project management, for instance. So again, in that engage phase, you start working a bit more on content, but already focused towards people who might be interested in changing their career. And only when you have that data, you come in with the right hook, and then you show specific advertising for a specific vacancy. So keep that in mind, this funnel thinking, discover, engage, attract, when you start building up your campaign, because it's going to be very important for you to collect the right set of data to know that you're reaching the right audience. Because Facebook is quite cheap, but it's not, it can get quite expensive quite quickly, depending on how many people you reach, and if your basic data set is not the right data set. But again, we'll explain that later on. And as it happens, it's the next session. I'm just going to check here if there's any more specific questions, but nothing yet. All right. Good. So preparation. There's two very important parts in developing your advertising on Facebook. One is the power of the creative. Talk about that later, but when creative, we mean the visuals, the text. How will you attract people? We talked about 160 meters scrolling every day. You need something which is thumb stopping. You need to make sure people stop, right? And then are triggered by what you're showing them, and then hopefully they will click on that to know more. So that's one important part of successful advertising. The second part is making sure you're talking to the right audience. What we always advise, there's a lot of possibilities on Facebook on how you can target people. There's an obvious one, which is linked to location. right? You can actually go and pinpoint 1 kilometer or 1 point with 1, 5, 10 kilometers or miles. I'm not sure where you're currently based, but so you can be very, very specific on location. That's one possibility. Another one where Facebook is very famous for is interests. So you can go very deep into targeting the right interests of your users. And the last one is all the data which is linked to the data you've built up about your users that you can use. Remember the funnel I've just shown you, discover, engage, attract. That gives you an enormous amount of data to help you target the right users. Little tip here, when you're developing a campaign with your team or by yourself for recruiting, start thinking about the interests and your potential interests of your target audience before you open up the Facebook Business Manager. Because it's very important to have already in your head what you think your audience is going to be interested in before you start looking at the plethora of options which are in Facebook. Because we noticed that once you start clicking on Facebook, you'll find so many options that it's going to be very hard to stick to what you really need. So do that exercise first. Write on paper what you think. If you're looking for people, if you're in the car leasing industry, maybe you're going to be looking for people who have a strong interest in cars, right? That's an obvious one. But do a bit of a brainstorm, put all those interests on a little bits of paper, paper or in a digital format, obviously. We're the 21st century now. Before you open up the Facebook Ads Manager. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, second part is, it's also always very interesting to have a look at the competition and what your competition is doing. I'll show you a little trick on that. There's an obvious one is you can go to your competition, look at their career pages and see what they're publishing, the kind of jobs they're publishing, the words they're using, the function names they're using. That's a good way to scope out competition. But Facebook also makes it quite easy for you to actually see which ads they're showing online. And I'll go live to the Facebook Ads Library. Now, the Facebook Ads Library allows you to check out what ads your competition is using today towards a certain audience. So I'm just going to ask in the chat, is there anybody you would like to see advertising from? Do you have any specific competitors that you are interested in? You want to see their Facebook advertising? So I'm just gonna, if you're interested, I'll allow that question to go into the chat. I'll give you 30 seconds. So the question, I'll repeat it, is there any specific competitor you would like to see advertising from? Okay, Valeria is typing. All right, NG. Now let's try NG. So we're in Belgium, ad category, and then we'll show all ads. And NG, which is, for those people who don't know, NG is a big player in the energy sector. And now you can actually see the advertising they currently have on air. That's important. They will only show the advertising which is currently on air, so not the past advertising. That's important also to always check what is happening. There's another question coming from Inditex. Let's see. I think Inditex is their, Inditex Clothing is a huge company. They don't have any ads at the moment, not in Belgium. Let's see across the world. Nothing else. But they're a holding company, so obviously they have some clothing brands like Zara. Let's try Zara. And there you can see all the Zara advertising which is currently being shown. Important point, and we'll share the link, or you can just Google Facebook Ads Library, and then it will show you. You even don't have to be logged into Facebook. I think you can just go there, and I'll just take that link and I'll put it in the chat. So you can go wild and look for the other brands which we didn't have time for. And I'll go back to the presentation. So use the Facebook Ads Library to kind of check out what your competition is doing. But very important, keep in mind that your competition is not necessarily the competition of your company. What I mean with that is obviously Zara has other clothing brands as competitors, but actually a competitor when you're recruiting is the people who are looking for the same kind of candidates as you. So if you're in engineering, you might be competing with companies in electricity. You might be competing with, I saw McKinsey being mentioned. Maybe McKinsey is also looking for engineers. So keep in mind that you have to get broad scope of what your competition might be, because the Facebook bidding model, i.e. how the pricing is set, is dependent on not just who your direct competition is as a company, but actually everybody who's looking for the same kind of candidates. We'll come back to that in a second. So that's how you can get some inspiration on maybe define a better visual. And there's some ground rules that we've learned over the years on how to build good performing advertising. One, use authentic pictures. So when possible, don't use stock images because people will smell that from a mile away. Don't forget, you're talking to an audience which is used to seeing pictures of their friends, of their family. If you then come with a very basic stock image, people will not stop scrolling. So use authentic pictures, right? Be uniform in your communication. So try and use the picture you're using in your campaign also on the page on your vacancy, right? And finally, keep in mind Facebook best practices. There's a couple of rules that Facebook has about not putting too much text, for instance, on a visual to keep it attractive. And again, Google Facebook best practices if you want to do that. Or you can check out one of our other webinars on how to make a great visual for your Facebook advertising. Again, if you're interested, you can send me a little email and we'll keep you posted on that. A couple of examples here of well-performing ads. And I showed it specifically because you might not think when you see the picture that this might work well. The picture on the left, it's a bit, overexposed or underexposed, it's a bit dark, but that one worked very, very well. The picture of the building, you might say, well, that's a boring building. This one worked very, very well. And the picture on the right, with two people, again, not looking into the screen, again, worked very well. So it's important not only to kind of keep an open mind when you're looking for pictures, but also very important to test. I'll give you an example here. Not sure if anybody of you know what A/B testing is, but basically A/B testing, as the name would suggest, you're going to show version A of a visual and compare it to version B. How does that work? Within Facebook, you choose a certain target audience, and then you're going to show the same visual to 50%. 50% of the audience will see version A, 50% will see version B. And maybe just as a test, this was a customer who was active in retail. We had two pictures. One of the pictures is just a team smiling. The other picture is everybody having a face mask on and a picture of their smile on a smartphone. Which one of these do you think worked best? So if you can just put left or right in the chat, might be interesting to have an understanding of what do you think performed best as far as recruiting is concerned. So which of these visuals attracted the most interesting candidates and made them apply? The one on the right. Right is more original. Right. Well, that's exactly what we thought. We thought the photo on the right was more original, right? And there was a bit of a smile involved and also a bit of a wink to the whole Corona situation, which is important and obviously has a big impact on retailing. But when we tested it, we saw the reverse. So the picture on the left had a lot more applications, and on top of that, they were a lot cheaper. So the CPA is your cost per application. We won't delve too much into the detail here, but it's basically the total cost of your advertising divided by the number of your applications. And as you can see, the picture we thought and the whole team thought was going to perform not as well, outperformed the other picture. So A/B testing is very important when you start developing your campaigns. Don't assume that you will know what's going to work best, just test it. Obviously, you cannot test 65 different pictures. You're going to have to make a pre-selection, but very important to do A/B testing. And again, in our other webinar about selecting the best visuals, we go into detail how you can test do the A/B testing. And then finally, we talked about Facebook best practices. This is an important one to keep in mind. When you start selecting your picture, keep in mind the format that it's going to be used for. So the newsfeed, both Instagram and Facebook both have a newsfeed and now have stories. Pictures are different. You can always upload a standard picture, and Facebook will then kind of start adapting it, put some bars on top or below it, but it's going to look ugly. So you will not get a warning from Facebook, by the way. You can just always upload any picture. But it's very important to keep in mind that ideally you develop the pictures in these formats and also upload them in these formats to make sure that you have the best visual experience, or at least your candidates have the best visual experience when they see your campaign. And you see video also being mentioned here. It's also something that we're using quite a lot actually for our customers. So we'll develop specific short videos of 10-15 seconds to attract candidates. But again, there, A/B testing, we always do A/B testing. We will also test a video versus a picture, and without kind of any clear reasoning behind this, sometimes the picture will outperform the video also. So again, testing is very important when you start developing your campaign. Again, let me check any more questions. All right, we'll come back to the question from Pablo at the end. So how do you set up a campaign? Quite important, because if you have kind of published or you have worked with Indeed or you have used any other job boards, Facebook is a whole different animal, right? It's a lot more complicated, and there's a couple of things you need to take into account when developing a campaign. Again, you will sometimes get a question from Facebook when you have a successful post on your Facebook page. They will ask you, do you want to boost this post? You can then put 40, 50, 60 euros on there. Don't waste your money on that. Okay, we've done the tests. That's not a good way to use Facebook advertising. You should use Facebook Business Manager, right? Which is the back office of Facebook. It's completely free. It's quite complicated, so you have to work a bit to get a hang out of it, but it's going to be outperforming any other boost campaign by far. So please, if there's one thing you take out of this, do not use boost, because it's very easy, but the results will not be good enough compared to managing your own campaign. Now, if you set up your campaign, there's one basic principle that's important to understand if you start opening Business Manager, which is quite complicated. And that's actually, it's a 3-level approach of Facebook. Let me explain that a bit in detail. Facebook will have different levels to the campaign. The first one is the campaign level, right? And on this stage, you will define the objective of your campaign. And your objective can be, to put it very bluntly, you can look for people who need to download your app if you're in software, right? Or your objective could be reach, meaning you want to reach as many people as possible. For instance, you have a new brand, you want to have a lot of people seeing your logo, you're going to be choosing reach as an objective at this stage. But we advise, especially if you're recruiting, if you want to start recruiting people through Facebook, is to choose conversion as your objective. So let's just say you open up a campaign, you will get the question from Facebook, what's your objective? If you're recruiting, we would advise you to use conversion as an objective. Again, we have another workshop where we delve deeper into that also. And that workshop is also free, as are all our webinars, by the way. So all the webinars we do are free. So don't hesitate to join other webinars also. So campaign, that's where you define your objectives. The second level is called ad sets. And that's where you define your target audience, the channels you will use, and also your budget, right? So that's the level where you will say, I'm willing to spend 20 euro per day with a maximum of 1,000 euros, for instance. You define that at your ad set, and that's also where you will say, I want to reach people with the interest in cars in London or 20 kilometers around London. That you define in the ad set. And only in the lowest level, which is called the ads level, that's where you will define your copy and your visuals. Now, once you set up your campaign, this will become a little more clear. What's important is to understand that this is not a one-on-one relationship. You could, for instance, have 5 ads, within one ad set. We talked about A/B testing. You could test an A visual and a B visual within the same ad set, right? So going to the same audience. But you could also have different ad sets under one campaign. But you'll only have one campaign. So you can only choose one objective. You can have different ad sets, and within each ad set, you can have different ads, right? But there's always going to be one campaign, and obviously the objective is valid for everything which is below that. So keep that in mind, this kind of 3-step approach of Facebook, also when you start thinking about developing your campaign. Good. Now, we already talked about the cost on Facebook. And again, Facebook is very different than your standard job board. On many job boards, you will either pay just to be present for a month, right? Indeed is a bit more advanced, and Indeed you will pay per click. But again, Indeed is mainly focused on attracting active candidates. But Facebook has a similar approach, although it's a bit more complicated to understand how the pricing really works. It's basically, there's 3 steps in the pricing, which, to be very clear, you do not control at all, right? So I'll explain to you how the pricing works, but don't expect that you'll be able to tweak the pricing. You'll have to pay the price that Facebook will tell you you'll have to pay. But first of all, there's a bidding. You can actually tell Facebook how much you're willing to pay for a conversion. So for somebody applying for your recruitment. So you can actually tell them, I'm willing to pay, for instance, to €5, €10 maximum for somebody clicking to my site, somebody converting, etc., etc., etc. That's the bidding system of Facebook, right? The second part is what is called estimation action rates. That's how well will your advertising perform. And the last one is the value. Facebook is very well aware that on one hand, they have to sell advertising, but on the other hand, they also have to make sure that their users are happy, right? So that they don't like advertising, which is basically crap, right? Which kind of distorts the Facebook experience. So the better your advertising, actually, the more creative your advertising, the better the user value, and hence you will pay less. That's important to keep in mind. That's completely different than the cost per click of Indeed. Here, actually, the more time you spend about thinking about your advertising, the better looking your advertising is, the less you will pay. And that's a very important principle to keep in mind once you start developing your advertising. Now, we get quite a lot of questions of customers or people we meet them. How can you calculate your budget? How much money will you need once you start doing your recruitment advertising campaign on Facebook. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of different factors which you don't really control. But we've tried to put this into a little formula, which we call very originally the financial Facebook formula. If you have any better names for that, please share them in the chat. And if we choose your name, we'll send you a small gift as a token of our appreciation. Now, you need to think about 3 numbers. The first number is how many applicants you actually want, right? That's important because some people say, well, I need to hire a lot of people, so I need 40 people who will apply. Others might go for a very niche recruitment, maybe they only need 5 people to apply. So the first one is how many applicants do you need? The second one is what's your conversion on the vacancy page? How many people do you think once they landed on your page, they will actually apply? Now, to give you an example, a good conversion rate would be 4%, right? If you have a very attractive vacancy page, a very attractive job, that's a good number to keep in mind. But we also sometimes see conversions about 0.5%. So there's a wide range there, right? And the last one is, what is going to be the conversion on your Facebook advertising? So how many people will actually click on your ad once they see that? And then conversion rates, maybe to kind of explain what a conversion rate is a bit more in detail. It's a very easy formula. You have the number of applications divided by the total visitors on your vacancy, right? And then you multiply that. So you have 50 application, 1,250 people have visited your website. Your conversion rate is about 4%. Now, again, we've put this into a little formula. It's an Excel sheet which you can then use to actually calculate your budget. We won't have time to go and show it live now, but send me a little email. My email is at the end of the presentation. Send me an email, and I'll more than happily send you the Excel file, and I will help you get a good understanding of how much money will you have to spend to get people applying for your vacancy. Sorry about that. I had to look for the word there. I just noticed there was another question. Yes, okay, question from Inge. And the question is, we use the lead generation as an objective. Is this less effective than conversion? Inge, what I think you mean is you will use a lead generation tool of Facebook. This is a whole different ball game. Maybe a quick explanation. What does that mean? That means that people who will click on the advertising will immediately be able to leave their name and their details as a lead, right? And you will then receive those leads in the list or through the Facebook system. It's an interesting approach. The disadvantage we noticed is that you cannot give a lot of explanation about your vacancy. So people will see your advertising, they will click, they will then have to decide based on the advertising, do they want to apply, yes or no? We think it's more interesting to actually push them towards a vacancy page where you can explain a bit more about your company, you can explain a bit more about your vacancy, and actually do the conversion on that page. That's what we learned about the last couple of years. So we prefer to have that system. That's also the approach our software is using. I'll show you that in a minute. But lead generation is indeed an interesting alternative. If it works for you, you can for sure test that. Then there's two questions at the same time from Natasha and Grazia on would you recommend Facebook over LinkedIn? Wholeheartedly, yes. There's a couple of reasons for that. There's a lot less traffic of passive candidates on LinkedIn, right? That's one. And that's a very important one. So the daily usage of LinkedIn is a lot lower than the daily usage on Facebook. So you have a lot more opportunities for advertising on Facebook to reach candidates. That's one thing. The second one is that LinkedIn tends to be a lot more expensive for clicks, right? You have a lot more targeting possibilities. I will agree on that. But as you probably noticed, putting your vacancy on LinkedIn, it's about 300, 400 euros to put your vacancy on there, but it's not effective, right? There's not a lot of valuable candidates. At least we're talking about our customers who completely stopped using that. And advertising as a model on LinkedIn is quite expensive. So to reach passive candidates, well, if you look at our budget splits, will probably be 70 to 80% will be on the Facebook platform and 20 to 30% will be on the LinkedIn platform. Because for some specific candidates, it might be interesting, but a big bunch of our budgets go to Facebook. All right, Natasha, follow-up question asks why LinkedIn isn't possible. Sorry, why LinkedIn doesn't reach attractive candidates, or I think it's probably more the question is why is the daily usage time on LinkedIn lower than Facebook? It's because of the content, right? Facebook was always built as a platform to keep people as long as possible on their platform. LinkedIn came from a different angle. The whole work around content, about user-based content, is a lot less developed on LinkedIn than on Facebook. But again, I'm not dissing LinkedIn as a channel at all. But as you noticed in the beginning, our focus is mainly on reaching passive candidates. And as far as passive candidates are concerned, we think Facebook is much stronger as a channel than LinkedIn. Okay, good. Let's move on. Data is king. That's the final part. We have a short poll, which I will launch on the Facebook Pixel, just to understand how many of you actually installed the Facebook Pixel on your website. So you should see that poll now. And somebody asks, we have most people asking, what the hell is a Facebook Pixel? Or no? Good, all right. That's so 70% of people, or 60% by now, have no clue what the Facebook Pixel is about. Have no fear, that's why we're here. What is a Facebook Pixel? It's a small piece of code which you'll add to your website. You can ask your developers to do that. It's not that complicated, but it will immediately increase the power of your Facebook advertising, because it will allow you and Facebook to also track, once people have clicked on a Facebook advertising and they come onto your website, you'll actually be able to track what people are doing. So if your objective is going to be conversions, it's going to be very important to have the Facebook Pixel on your website so it can actually track if people are converting. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but just write that down, Facebook Pixel, talk to your developers, ask them to install your Facebook Pixel on you. It's literally, it's going to be 15 minutes work. It's completely GDPR proof, to be very clear, but you'll have to ask permission to users coming onto your website to use it. I think by now, most of you will have a pop-up with requesting the use of cookies and third-party pixels. Once you have that, you're fine, right? But just also make sure with your legal team that you're covered on that angle. But Facebook will not obviously track individuals. It will also be aggregated data that is used. But if you're serious about data-driven recruitment, if you're serious about recruiting through Facebook, please install the Facebook Pixel. That's one thing to set up. And the other one is, once you go further, there's a couple of very interesting tools, free, by the way. So Google Analytics is a very powerful tool to actually track users once they're on your vacancy on your website. So you can see how long do they stay, how much of the page have they scrolled, how long do they stay before they click and they apply. It's a very, very, very interesting know-how. Also, for instance, Google Analytics will allow you to see how many of your traffic is coming from Indeed, how many people are coming from Facebook, how many people are coming through Google or LinkedIn. A couple of questions on LinkedIn also. So please, again, look at Google Analytics. It's completely free, very powerful. There's some alternatives, but you have to pay for the alternatives. So we always advise to use Google Analytics. Another Google tool is Google Tag Manager. This will allow you to use the Facebook Pixel in an easy way. And a final tool is Google Data Studio. And again, we're not being sponsored by Google if you would have any questions on that. But these are free, very powerful tools that will ramp up your insights into data, into what's happening on your website in a very easy way. You can, to be very clear, you can do Facebook advertising without any of these tools, right? That's not a problem. You can just set up Facebook advertising without them, but it will make it a lot more powerful if you spend some time setting everything up. And again, I'm referring to one of our other webinars and also our white paper. I will share that now. Come to think about it, give me 1 second, because we wrote an interesting white paper on this. I will share that in the chat now. Let's see. Is that working? It is working. And come to think of it, we also have a white paper on Facebook advertising, which I will also share here in the chat. So you can download that. And that's a bit more in detail about what we've been talking about now. Okay, we're almost at the end. Just maybe a bit, I hope this wasn't too complicated in how to set up your advertising campaigns. Obviously, I wouldn't be remiss to talk a bit about our software. So in case you're serious about using recruitment, Facebook recruitment, you can also use our software, right? Which allows you to do A/B testing on the fly, set your maximum budget, and also have an immediate view on your advertising. I'll quickly, if you give me 20 seconds, just show you. You can see my screen now here. Yes. So this will allow you to manage candidates, right? So you can actually see all the incoming candidates, manage them, can move candidates around, whether they're interesting or not interesting. And that data will then be used to improve your campaigns. But also by one click, you will see all your social media campaigns with one overview. And that will allow you, through our software, to run different campaigns, automatically optimized by our algorithm, right? Automatically A/B testing of your different visuals, automatic, as you can see here, for instance, our software decided to put on hold one of the advertisings because it wasn't performing well. So all this, can be done completely automatically if you don't feel like diving too deep into the whole plethora of options that is being given by Facebook. And again, come to think of it, I will share you a link to our webpage where you can learn more about our software. And you can also request a free trial. So you can run a free trial. Let's see if that link is working that I put on there. And it is working. Yes. So if you want a free trial of our software to help you set up your Facebook advertising, your A/B testing, please feel free to ask for that free trial over there. It's amazing software. And of course, I have to say that because I'm the founder, but I promise you, I'm not lying. It's amazing software. We have about 150 customers using it, big brands that are using this software at the moment. Okay, I think the final slide is the Q&A. And I will now go to the questions tab to check if there were some questions we haven't answered yet. Let's have a look there. And please feel free to still ask questions. We have a bit of time left, so don't hesitate to answer questions. Sorry, to ask questions. I will do the answering. I will try to do the answering. Right, so the question of Sean. how can we make use of digital marketing to increase effective recruiting? I hope that has become a bit more clear, Sean, through the webinar. Alexis had a question of how can you scale up? So he has a successful advertising on Facebook, how you can scale it up to Instagram. Very good question. The short answer on that one is make sure you use the right format. So Instagram has a completely different format for pictures and for video, but you can actually use the learnings from your Facebook campaign, the audiences that were working very well. You can now scale that up to Instagram. A word of warning though, we've noticed that there's a big difference in Instagram and Facebook. So normally our software, or when we do the campaigns ourselves, we'll notice about 4 or 5 days where Instagram is actually working as a channel for us. And either we'll start fine-tuning on Instagram with some specific visuals, or we'll shut down Instagram and move to Facebook. So at a certain moment, you also have to decide whether it's still worth it to have both channels in parallel, or whether you want to focus on one of both. Okay, Pablo, you asked Discover. I hope that became clear. So the Discover phase is when you do not have any data yet about your audience, and you will start understanding about what kind of audience would react well to content about, for instance, construction workers, as I mentioned. So you can actually use content in the Discover phase to start understanding which target audiences or which data you can actually use for discovering new target audiences. Then the question from Inge on lead generation I've answered. Audrey asks about Clubhouse. Good question. Well, we're not active on Clubhouse. I think it's a very popular medium at the moment, but the advertising model isn't clear. Same for TikTok, for instance. TikTok is a very popular medium at this moment, but the efficiency on their advertising hasn't yet been proven. So we've done a couple of tests also on the TikTok platform, not yet on Clubhouse, I will admit. But TikTok at this moment is quite expensive to reach the right candidates. So we haven't yet continued into that direction. Then Trisha, what tips do you have for recruiters new to the industry who do not have an allocated budget for campaigns? Unfortunately, Trisha, I have bad news for you. That because we've tried that, you're going to have to spend money on Facebook to reach candidates. And that's also what I mentioned in the beginning. Organic traffic, so meaning the free traffic you will get on Facebook, it's not performing. It's very clear Facebook as a business is trying to push companies into spending money on advertising in many ways. And I'm not don't mean that disrespectful to Facebook. That's their business model. That's very clear from the beginning. So it's going to be almost impossible to start recruiting targeted. I mean, I'm not saying you cannot recruit, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time in developing the right content. It's going to be very difficult to target the right candidates. Pablo asked if you can just use stories in Instagram to publish an offer. Yes, you've seen some of the examples I gave were about Instagram stories. So stories is an interesting format. But ideally, what works well in stories is that you cut your video in 2 or 3 parts, so people can actually tap on the right-hand side and move to the next part of your video. So it's a bit of complicated technically, so you'll have to look about that. But once you get that working in the right way, you can publish ideally also on stories. Another question from Grazia about senior positions, whether you could still recommend Facebook campaigns. Very good question. Second part of the question is about, is it only for new generation or more entry-level positions? No. We are recruiting or we're using Facebook to recruit even middle management people, engineers with 5 to 10 years experience, and we do that successfully, right? Where the cutoff is about people who have a certain seniority and they are expecting to be called by headhunters, right? For instance, senior lawyers, or people C-level positions, or higher middle management. That's where we don't use Facebook anymore. And we also advise our clients not to use Facebook. But 5 years experience, 10 years experience, those are positions, even in niche jobs that we are easily, not easily, but that we can actually reach with our software, but also you could reach them with your campaigns. Natasha asks, how many ads candidates do you place per month? Well, that's we run about, well, we run quite a lot of campaigns. We've run 5,500 campaigns to date. I think probably a more interesting question is that we will reach for a good campaign, an average campaign will be between 20 and 50 applications per campaign. I think that's a good number to keep in mind, right? For some campaigns, you saw a campaign for the National Lottery, which is in Vint, it's a sales position. We had about 180, right, candidates applying. So that's an outlier, right? But for an average campaign, it'll be between 20 and 50. Very important. What we've noticed in the past years, it's not so much the power of the brand, of the employer brand, but more about what can you actually offer to trigger people. So you have to think about when you develop your campaign, even if you're a small company, even if you're not very well known, think about what are the benefits for a passive candidate that he should choose your company for. And that can be, for instance, you get 1 week of training every year, right? Or you can work 50% of the time, you can work from home. Maybe in a current Corona environment, that might not be a added value anymore, but you know what I mean. Start thinking about what are the added value you can give to candidates and try to put that into your campaign. Audrey asks, what is the minimum budget to allocate to hire a candidate for blue collar? I think you have to keep in mind as a kind of you need to be willing to spend between 20 to 40 euros per day on Facebook. Why is that? That will allow, for instance, if you're using our software or if you're using your own approach for A/B testing, but that gives you a bit of space to do some testing, right? To get some data, to get some learnings out of it. If you go too low, let's say 5 euros per day, you will not generate enough clicks. You will not generate enough traffic to start learning from that. Now, if you're spending about 20 to 50 euros per day, after a week, you will get a good understanding of what the quality of the candidates will be, let's say 10 days, right? So I would say, if you're serious about this, you need to be willing to spend between 200 to 500 euros as a budget for a campaign to get some learnings and, fortunately, if all goes well, to also get the right candidates to apply. Valeria asks a question, what is the main difference when you use advertising as a recruiting agency for attracting talent for your clients? Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but I think the question is, what do you put in the advertising? And I refer back to the answer I gave earlier. We start thinking about what are the triggers that could attract people to actually click on your advertising because they want to know more about your company. And I often say to our customers, imagine you're at a bar, again, pre-corona, or if you're in the UK already from this Monday, right? If you're in a bar and you find somebody who's interested in your company, what are the 2-3 things you're going to tell them to convince him to come work for you? And those 2-3 things, you need to think about those and start thinking about a way to put them into a campaign to attract users to your vacancy. I hope that was an answer, Valeria. Inge asks, how long should you let a campaign run? Very good question. There's no easy answer to that. Again, there's no easy answer to anything on Facebook, unfortunately. So I think the easy answer is you should test. The probably more useful answer is that you should think about, we have 1 minute left, and then again, they will stop. Sorry, I didn't know that there was a limit, just being told that. But test it, Inge, is the answer. So unfortunately, I didn't know, but we will have to stop here. I will once click on this slide and leave you with that. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any more questions, send me an email on mark@simple.be. And I hope you found this useful. So thank you very much. Don't hesitate to send me an email or use our data white paper, and keep hold of our website for our other webinars we are publishing. Thank you very much. Have a great day.